it's not that we want to advocate for violence, but it is true that after World War II, violence was in some ways eradicated from the public sphere in every way. And, for most modern people wouldn't understand that 100 years ago, police would not be involved in, let's say, home disputes, like would not be involved in family squabbles, in family fights, that you were allowed to have a duel between two men and kill each other, and you would not go to jail because you had agreed to have a duel. All these things, there is a way in which violence was far more organically integrated into society. It doesn't mean we're advocating for it, but like you said, if you suppress it completely in every single way, and then you come to a point where you say things like, words are violence, and or silence is violence. Can you imagine? It's like not just words, but also silence. Silence is violence. Then you are asking for it. Like in some ways, you're asking for what's happened. And so it comes to a point, if you've equalized everything into violence, and that words are violence and opinions are violence, then shooting Charlie Kirk it's just like one for one, right? It's like violence for violence. You want to speak bad words, then we're going to shoot you. And that is actually, it's at the same level because it's all violence. Violence should be answered with violence. So, yeah, there is. And so I think we are going to see, it seems like the war is coming. It seems like that's at this point inevitable. I wish I could say it isn't, but people seem to be hungry for it. So.
This is Jonathan Pajot. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
Hello, everyone. We are finally announcing our Paradiso class. We have done 2 already. We have the Inferno, we have the Purgatory, and now we are moving to Paradise.
That is right. Dante himself says in Inferno that we prefer hell to paradise. And similarly, most of us prefer to read Inferno, but when we come to reading Paradiso, we're very confused. So we're going to be actually taking you through that poem line by line, like we did with Inferno and Purgatorio, and actually looking at how Dante very carefully reconciles some of the contradictory traditions about the heavens in the Christian apocalyptic tradition, and does that through the persons of the saints.
And so this is truly important for us right now with the re-enchantment of the world happening. We have to be able to look at those that did it in the most powerful way, that were able to reconcile the ancient pagan traditions with Christianity, with his modern understanding, the most modern understanding of the cosmos that he had. And so this is the work that we need to do. And so we need to learn from Dante. So the course starts November 5th to December 3rd, right? Is that what I've got? 5 weeks, right. 2 to 5 on Wednesdays.
So the cost is going to be $190 US. And if you don't want to watch live, you'll be able to follow along at your own pace, just like with all of our courses. You'll have access to lecture recording, slides, additional readings, and you can still ask questions and interact with your fellow classmates in our circle forums.
And so join us. After all of this suffering through Inferno and Purgatorio, the symbolic world finally goes to heaven.
Yeah, join us.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
And we're delighted to be joined by a very familiar face to all of you, I'm sure. Jonathan Pajot, you're very welcome.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
It's good to have you here. We were just talking before we started recording about the recent assassination, I suppose you'd say, of Charlie Kirk, and then the things going on over here in the UK with the Unite the Kingdom rally. And you were expressing a kind of change of thought around things after those events. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I wasn't particularly a fan of Charlie Kirk. I mean, I wasn't against him. I just didn't. He wasn't that much on my radar. I knew of him. I was actually planning. My team and them were planning that I would be on his podcast in the next few months. But when he was shot, I mean, obviously it was shocking. Like it was shocking because it was clearly a public execution. It was done on purpose, kind of like how they tried to kill Trump and, to make a spectacle of it. But it was mostly the reaction of people that really what shocked us and shocked me, because people that I know, people, friends of my daughters, people around us, some people celebrated, some people dismissed it as irrelevant. And, and so I felt like it really revealed something about the state of the world that, although I kind of knew intuitively, that I started to see more clearly. Some friends of mine went to the vigil in New York. It was actually Winston Marshall. He went to the vigil in New York, and he said, it was just a few days after he died, for goodness sake. And he said the vigil was infiltrated by Antifa people wearing all black and, grinning and laughing in their faces and just putting their cameras up in people's faces and, moving around like little demons through the crowd, just giggling and laughing. These are very, like I said, it reveals where we are in the world, and in some ways how I think that the culture war has become a little more hot. So all of a sudden you're asking questions about people in your church, like some people in my church, what do I do? How do I do this? How do I now go back? And I understand that there are lies that are said about him. And so that some people believe that he was something that he wasn't. I agree with that. And I didn't agree with all his positions, obviously. But but I don't know how to deal with the fact that then it's not a big deal that someone like that was assassinated in public. Like I don't know how to deal with that.
The thing I found about it was that there were people who I knew, friends, who were kind of making out like he deserved it.
Yeah.
But they were doing it in a way that they seemed to be unconscious of what they were actually saying.
Yeah.
They were putting it across as a completely rational position. And it wasn't until you pointed out that, what you're doing here is saying that it's justified that this guy was shot dead on a campus in front of thousands of people and his family. And then they were like, oh, no, I didn't really mean that. But that's like literally what he said. I found that extraordinary that has crept into people's thinking.
Yeah. Well, people tend to think like, well, because of his political positions, he had it coming, kind of thing. Yeah. Which is that, okay, that is obviously we've now tipped into another level here of political discussion. And it means that, and it's weird because, violence has always been part of politics. It's not like this is new. They're actually in the modern age, let's say, since World War II, the idea that violence should not be a part of politics has actually been a part of the peace, the great peace that we've enjoyed. And so if we're going to return to the idea that violence is a part of internal politics, obviously we still kind of believe that violence is a part of external politics, right? That is dealing with people that are, enemy armies or people that are breaking the laws. But if it's going to be part of internal politics, I mean, we are obviously heading towards very dark times. So now we have, let's say hundreds of years ago, people in the parliament getting into a fist fight, these things happened not all the time, but they haven't happened quite often. But now the means of violence have increased so much that to move down that road is to invoke far greater consequences. In general, the jubilation at the return of violence, I think that's a good way of understanding what's happening. And it's not, and I think the reason why the Charlie Kirk event was so marked, because it's, it's very symbolic in the sense that, it was in public, it was done like as a kind of public execution. But I think in general, we're seeing with what I call the breakdown of the World War II consensus, I guess you could call it, we're seeing a return of violence and a kind of return of jubilation towards violence. We basically now all so many people accepted that, yeah, we're going to have World War III. It's just a question of time. When is World War III going to happen? Yeah, there'll probably be nuclear war, but it's just how it is. In the 80s and remember in the 80s and 90s, I mean, we did everything to stop a nuclear war. We did like anything we could do to avoid nuclear exchange, we would. But now it's like,
Yeah.
Might happen, like, a dirty bomb in France, like that might happen. You just have to be kind of ready for it.
There's a couple of times you've linked this to the post-World War II consensus. Is there an element in which, I don't really know how to explain this, but the establishment of the UN, the pointing to the Holocaust as the most evil thing that could ever happen, that can never happen again, that there was a sort of enforced, tyrannical and artificial suppression of any violence, that now it's erupting organically because the suppression was almost, it's not that I'm advocating for violence, but that was like, right, we are now, this is, who is it that wrote the end of history, and this sort of, year zero, let's begin. But that's not the reality, that's not true.
No, I think that's right. And this is tricky things to talk about because obviously, like you said, it's not that we want to advocate for violence, but it is true that after World War II, violence was in some ways eradicated from the public sphere in every way. And, we, for most modern people, wouldn't understand that 100 years ago, police would not be involved in, let's say, home disputes, like would not be involved in family squabbles and family fights, that you were allowed to have a duel between two men and to kill each other, and you would not go to jail because you had agreed to have a duel. All these things, there was a way in which violence was far more organically integrated into society. It doesn't mean we're advocating for it, but like you said, if you suppress it completely in every single way, and then you come to a point where you say things like, words are violence, and or silence is violence. Can you imagine? It's like not just words, but also silence. Silence is violence. Then you are asking for it. Like in some ways, you're asking for what's happened. And so it comes to a point, if you've equalized everything into violence, and that words are violence and opinions are violence, then shooting Charlie Kirk it's just like one for one, right? It's like violence for violence. You want to speak bad words, then we're going to shoot you. And that is actually, it's at the same level because it's all violence. Violence should be answered with violence. So, there is. And so I think we are going to see, it seems like the war is coming. It seems like that's at this point inevitable. I wish I could say it isn't, but people seem to be hungry for it. So, and it's the same, and it's interesting. It is definitely related to World War II consensus, because some things that were completely unacceptable. It's related to the Israel-Gaza situation. Like, I don't want to get too political, but, in some ways, the state of Israel is the World War II consensus state. Right. It is these group of people that have been without a state for thousands of years, that have been in the margins of society, that are finally given a chance, to have their own state. But then what happens when that state now starts to act in the ways that are forbidden in the World War II consensus? How do you deal with that? And so it's like it's making everything break, like it's making everything crack because we have no frame to deal with this, and that's why especially the right is making the conservative party in the U.S., the Republican Party in the U.S., it's just splitting it and it's like cutting it up because it's creating incoherence in how do we deal with this now.
It's so complicated. It frightens me, to be honest.
Yes,
but it's that there's some incredible symbolism about the fact that this tension exists in that particular part of the world.
Of course.
I find that fascinating.
It's the center of the world. It's been since 33. It's been since the death of Christ, and it still is. No matter what you say, it's still the center of the world. So, and it's going to be the center of the world until the eschaton, and you can't help that. So it's obvious that in some ways the most symbolic image of what's happening everywhere is being crunched into the Holy Land and is manifesting itself in the Holy Land. A lot of people say, they always wonder, like, how is this Jerusalem? How is it the city of peace if it's a place of constant constant conflict, and you have to really understand it as, in some ways, the heart of the world. And Christ talks about how violence also comes out of the heart, right? And so if it becomes an image of the world, like if in the idea that Jerusalem is constantly in this state of uneasiness is also an image of how the world is in this state of uneasiness. So it's like a microcosm of the state of things.
I want to move on a little and talk about the idea of enchantment. For a long time now, we've heard about re-enchantment. I think I've heard, you speak about re-enchantment. We've spoken about it. Rod Dreher's written Living in Wonder, and there's lots of talk about re-enchantment. And as Catholics, we've quite liked this because we see, especially over here, the Protestant Reformation as kind of stripping away the supernatural. And so when we hear enchantment, we think bringing back all the kind of the supernatural and Our Lady. But we've just had a conversation with a professor over here, Jacob Phillips, and he's brilliant in what he says, and he says we should have a little less enchantment and a bit more disenchantment.
I would say a few things to that. I would say the idea that Christianity is in itself kind of disenchantment. I think that's kind of hogwash. I don't think that's true at all. The idea that the principalities are submitted to Christ, the idea that the angels, that all of the spiritual beings are submitted to Christ, that is true. And in some ways you could say there is a reality, which is that they become less salient to some extent because they're submitted to Christ, and so they don't scream out in their own name the way that the ancient gods did, where the gods would fight amongst themselves. That is something that definitely goes away. But the idea that the world is not full of God's life and that the world is not full of divine presence, that's hogwash. And I hope no one ever believes that. The animistic part, right? The idea that there are like, titular spirits and this continues in Christianity. But the difference is that we participate in that process. When Christ says that we will reign with him, it means that now the saints become in some ways the version of titular spirits that the ancients had. The saints become the patrons of places, they become the patrons of families, the patrons of people, and in some ways they act as these titular characters. But the difference, like you said, is that the saints are all submitted to Christ absolutely, and that they refract Christ in the world. But the Middle Ages this is really a Protestant thinking, like the idea that Judeo-Christianity strips the world of its magic, or strips the world of these titular spirits or these intelligences, I think is very Protestant. Yeah. And I think it's also false. And I think that that's what's happening now, is that at some point now people are seeing that it's false. But we've had hundreds of years of removing the language and wisdom that we had to deal with this reality. And now it's coming back. And you're right, it is coming back mostly pagan, because it's as if we're discovering these things for the first time. We're like that teenage sorcerer that finds a grimoire and doesn't know what he's doing and opens it up and is like, oh, look at this. And they're like pointing to all these things. And now they become completely taken over, broken down. People are doing psychedelics, they're encountering these beings. People are doing meditation, they're encountering these beings. And they just see it all as all equal, because they're all Democrats, right? They all believe in democracy. So, the demons are as the same as the angels and the saints, and it's all the same. So I think that it is actually in recovering a true Christian ontology, like a recovering Dante and recovering that vision of the world, that we can enter into this kind of re-enchanted reality without the pitfalls of it being just a pagan resurgence. But it's going to be a pagan resurgence because, like I said, it's kind of too late, because you have a bunch of neophytes that are encountering spirits and they have no idea what they're doing. And so
there is an element to the fact that the conflict between Christianity and paganism where Christianity saved us from the need to believe that we were cursed or
Yeah.
that these spirits had power over us. So it gets confused with the demysticism sort of language. But there was definitely a confrontation between the pagan world and the Christian world, and it was Christianity that saved us, wasn't it, from that sort of
Yeah, because the
belief
difference
in
is, it really is the difference is that one of the things that the way that the pagan principalities were dealt with is that in some ways they people would see that they had authority, but they would in some ways try to trap or propitiate or do whatever they could to basically be on the good side of these principalities, or maybe even use them to their own purposes. And so and people were afraid, like you said, people were afraid of these principalities, but they would still propitiate them in order to get something from them. That all that is absolutely gone. I mean, nobody is afraid of Saint Peter and propitiates to him because they hope to have a little bit of the keys for themselves and to be able to unlock some things. I mean, except for occultists, nobody does that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And the whole idea was wrapped up in that Chesterton quote, once we've stopped believing in God, it's not that we'll believe in nothing, it's that we'll believe in anything. And we seem to be going in that way, exactly as you've just articulated, that, we've got like crystals and angels and all this kind of stuff coming out because people have lost that hierarchical understanding of that God is above us and that there is something more important than us and that we've got a place in that, creation, in that pantheon.
Yeah, and that Christ, as St. Paul says, Christ is subjugating all the thrones, all the principalities to himself, that he is the one who sits on the throne in heaven, and that all the angels are all submitted to him, and the demons too. They just don't know it, but ultimately the entire thing has become submitted to him.
Yeah. And one of the other things that we spoke about in that conversation was about how we've just come out of it seems not that long ago, this trust the science narrative. And that's a perfect idea a perfect example of saying it's the science we trust, and not saying actually the science isn't what we trust. We can trust the good that undergirds any science. So in medicine, you could use your medicine to heal burns victims or to give women big breasts, or you can use the theory of relativity to destroy a city or to some other good thing, she says, not knowing what the theory of relativity does. So I'm so
well,
not.
We understand your point. The idea is that science does not have the good in itself. It's only a means to power over phenomena. That's what science is.
Yeah. So if Christ isn't what animates, like if I think that the argument there was if there isn't that Christian understanding and we say we put all of this under Christ, then it can go awry. And this brings me to your recent guest. I think you said his name is Michael Levin. I was watching your conversation with him, and you'll have to tell me his name. The
Michael
other guy,
Levin, yeah, Michael Levin,
and
John Vervaeke,
yeah. And I was about 45 minutes in, and I was just thinking, this is insane. This is madness, and also frightening. And I think you described him as a bit of a magician.
Well, I mean, a magician in the sense that he is in some ways rediscovering vertical connections in the world of science. He's understanding that it's not just a bunch of stuff that you analyze, but that there are living patterns that embody themselves in biological form, and that these living patterns are in some ways best understood as intelligences that want something and that are manifesting themselves in bodies. And so he now calls himself a Platonist. He says that he's a scientist, right? So in some ways he's grasping for words about what it is that he's encountering. He's not like a trained philosopher or theologian. And so he's seeing that these are real, and that if you treat the world this way, like if you act as if the world is like this, and that there are these wills and patterns that embody themselves in the world, then it yields much more than what the kind of geneticist type biologists can do and can understand. But like you said, in some ways in a way, it's frightening because it does feel like magic is coming back in the world, because he can manipulate forms if he's able to tap into the right purpose. So you could think of it. I mean, I don't want to say that that's what he's doing, but it is a little bit akin to saying, well, if I know the right formulation, like if I know the right spell and I speak it on a phenomena, then I can reorder the phenomena to my will, right? I can kind of reorder the phenomena to my will. And there's a little bit of that going on with him, especially because he seems to think or believe in what he calls freedom of embodiment, which is that he would like humans to reach the capacity to have, in some ways, the body that they would want. And that's why it's closer to magic, because magicians use angels or trap spirits or, kind of download these wills into the world, but always to serve their own will, always to increase their power and that's different from the Christian vision, the Christian ontology, which is that we believe in all that stuff, right? We believe that all of that stuff is real and all that stuff works, but we think that we have to say, thy will be done, right? That we have to trust that we participate in God's will in a way that is for our good, and that our will and our desire to have wings or to have, 3 arms could lead us down paths that would be against our own good. But that's something that I don't think that he's still figuring out, And so, I mean, I hope to have more conversations with him, but you can see that it's stuff that he's still kind of struggling with or dealing with,
It's interesting you say he's not doing it, or he's not saying this, but that's not the point. It's like people who say, well, in my hands this is perfectly safe. You say, but who's to say it's always in your hands?
That's always the problem of technology, is that technology is power. That's what technology is, power. And that, if it is, whatever you develop will be used by your enemy. Like, you just always have to understand that. Like when Elon Musk says, we're putting chips in your brain, but don't worry, it's like, it's me. Hey, come on, you trust Elon, right? It's me. And also it'll be voluntary. It's like, well, I'm not sure that that's how it's going to end. I'm not sure that how this story is going to end. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question then.
Yeah.
Can you tell us one symbol, story, or myth that's most profoundly transformed your own life and outlook, and why?
Well,
You're going to say
this is going to be boring, because I'm just say 2. There's really 2. In some ways, there's the Genesis 1. I mean, from the creation to Babel, to the Tower of Babel. I mean, to me, that is the most powerful story. It's the most powerful story ever told, and it's only eclipsed, like you said, by the story of Christ himself, because in some ways Christ reveals some aspects of that creation story that were hidden maybe in the story, and that he kind of opens up and you see it now through the lens of his story. So those definitely are the stories that I go back to all the time.
Are they archetypes? Would you say that, like, embedded in those stories, are they archetypal stories, or is there some different way of looking at it in terms of truth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the use of the word archetype is a fine word. It's been kind of, you could say, twisted by Jung, but Saint Gregory of Nyssa used the word archetype when he talks about when he talks about the pattern of the tabernacle as being in some ways the pattern of the church. That's the idea that it's the archetype is the pattern, and then there's the embodiment of that pattern. And so I think that for sure, especially Genesis 1, that's clearly what that story is. It's the pattern of everything. It describes the cosmos in the best way possible. And then that pattern, the problem with the pattern is that sometimes you don't understand all its implications because it's so simple. It's like you look at a seed and you're like, well, I don't know what this is. It's just a dot, right? It's just a little dot. And then it has to embody itself in order for you to see the implications. And I think the entirety of Scripture is that embodiment, where you are now seeing the different iterations of the union of heaven and earth happen in different ways all through the Bible. And that culminates, of course, in Christ. And then finally, it actually culminates in the book of Revelation. And so the final image of the heavenly Jerusalem and the great wedding, of Christ and all of creation. That is the final image of it's the final image of the Spirit of God hovering above the waters. The last one is that the sea has become crystal, the creation has become a city, and she's prepared like a bride for her groom, and God has married his creation. That's the end of that story. So it's like, the Genesis 1, and like I said, it's the greatest story, but it doesn't mean that it's like a imaginary thing. Like, that's the problem with the word archetypes, that sometimes people think that archetype means it's imaginary. It's not imaginary. It's the realest story that's ever been told.
Yeah, and that's what I meant really. Like, are those because we see those patterns repeated throughout Scripture, don't we? Like the garden, the image of the garden, and like obviously after Jesus rises from the dead, we see him. He's mistaken by Mary Magdalene for the gardener, isn't he? And they meet in the garden, but he can't be held on. So there's all that dimension, and the tree of good and the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life. The cross, and all of those things that they're like that. So they're repeated throughout Scripture, aren't they?
That's right. That's exactly right. And not only are they repeated throughout Scripture, but they're repeated throughout all the stories. So, all of the stories that we tell, all are in some ways little iterations of the Genesis 1 story, or they're playing out the implication of the Genesis 1 story. And sometimes it's harder to see because we don't necessarily, if we don't have you could say the capacity to identify the elements, right? If you don't understand what heaven is and you don't understand what earth is, then it is sometimes harder to see it in other stories and to realize that, no, this is talking about the same thing. It's just using stand-ins for each other. But once you start to see what it is that's implied with these categories, then you realize that it's everywhere.
Well, this brings me to a question. Something that preoccupies me is the idea of femininity and masculinity. And I'm very aware, I do a lot of talks with young women. And I was watching your conversation with Michael Knowles. It was about 3 years ago, in fact, but I watched it again recently. And in it, one of the things he said is, you were talking about symbols and pointing symbolism and symbols. And he said, if gender expression is the symbol, that which is being symbolized is biological sex. And I've been thinking about
I think that's wrong.
I think that's wrong. So I said,
I love Michael and everything, but it's not right.
No, I thought if male and female are the symbols, this is what prompted me to think from what he said, which I agree was wrong. I said, if male and female are the symbols, that which is symbolized is femininity and masculinity, which are cosmic principles of all creation. So it is, in fact, just give me your thoughts on this. It is, in fact, biological sex that is the symbol.
Yeah.
And so we can't get to a point of saying, so then I started thinking about the mess we're in. And I thought we can't get to a point of saying the symbols have no meaning, which is where we've got to, unless we destroy the thing that they symbolize.
Yeah.
And so then, I know this might seem like a shift, but it makes sense to me. And you spoke about it. We get into Eucharistic theology. So the thing that marriage symbolizes has been destroyed. So is it any wonder that marriage has been destroyed? So I took Michael Knowles' point and thought, no, I'm not sure he's right there. I think it's, I think he's hung up on the wrong thing.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, it's the other way around. Yeah.
But
great as he is.
To be generous to Michael, I think that sometimes we get tripped up with language,
Of course. And so recording and
one of the ways of understanding is that there's the symbol is the ground in some ways, right? Because you don't encounter the pattern without its embodiment. The pattern is useless. Like, not it's useless, but it's like we always think, it's like, oh, you just want to go to heaven. No, actually, no, you don't want to go to heaven. Like, I mean, it's not that great to go to heaven. What you want is the resurrection in the kingdom of heaven. You want the kingdom of heaven. It's not the same as heaven. It's when heaven embodies itself in phenomena. And so the embodiment is the ground. And that's why I understand what he's saying is like biological sex is the thing that is the most immediate to us to experience the difference between heaven and earth, between the masculine and the feminine, between these higher, like more universal categories. And therefore, one of the things you can try to do is you can do it both ways. Like you said, one is you can try to destroy the myth. You can try to destroy the pattern of the relationship between heaven and earth and try to break that, invert it, twist it, or whatever. But the other thing you can also do is it's like kind of decapitating something. You cut off the genitals, right? You try to remove the embodiment so that the pattern floats off into the air, right? You try to destroy so like, I mean, this sounds very weird. So you have a city, right? So let's say you have Rome, and like Rome changes, right? So you have the idea of Rome, right? The idea of Rome is what holds Rome together, but it has to be embodied in the city. So one of the things you can do is try to pervert the idea of Rome so you can destroy the city. But then the other thing you can do is just bomb the hell out of Rome until there's nothing left. And then let's see if they can, like, let's see if the idea of Rome is gonna take seed again. Maybe, maybe not. You know, some cities. I mean, look at what happened to Baghdad. You know, it's like, you know, after the Mongols got through Baghdad, well, Baghdad, you know, it sprung up, but very little. It didn't spring up like it did, you know, before the 12th century.
I think we've destroyed the idea of the city. I think it's because we've destroyed the idea of. My view tends towards the idea that, which is why I mentioned Eucharistic theology, that we've destroyed the idea of the real presence. I know that's a term that's been distorted as well. So then everything crumbles because of that. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we have such chaos and incoherence, and that the answer then is sacramental.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. That I think that for sure the attack on the Eucharist and the reduction of the Eucharist, first of all, to something that was merely symbolic, like that attempt in some ways was, like you said, wrenching out the heart of Christianity, the place where the unity of heaven and earth was made manifest to us in a perfect way. And then downstream from that, like you said, downstream from that are the suburbs, you know, downstream from that are, well, the church. If there's no Eucharist, then the church is it's fine. We go there to worship God, but we don't need the church like building. The building is just, you know, it's just a symbol. You don't really need it. And it doesn't have to be in the middle of the town. It can be wherever. It could be in a strip mall. It could be wherever. And so you keep like devolving until basically nothing means anything anymore. And you just, you know, it's just flat. Everything becomes flat.
It's really interesting that I've got some Baptist friends, and I kind of get invited up to the church occasionally.
Not anymore.
That's come to an end. But basically,
no, sorry.
It's a bit frightening, the truth, isn't it? The hound.
I've been terrifying them, yeah. So, but basically, there's tension within that community between, there are people who want a sacred space to worship that they think should be separate,
like dedicated,
yeah. And then there are other people who think, oh, there is no such thing as a holy place, and so they want to, you know, they let the kids play football in the church, and, you know, whatever, it doesn't make any difference. And you can see how that's their building is, I mean, it's architecturally a beautiful building, but it could be someone's house, it could be literally anything, you know. All the Christian symbolism has been removed. And you can see the tension between those people who are like, well, shouldn't we have a bit of Christian, something that marks it out as something separate for God? It's just craziness. And that is the craziness of Protestantism.
Yeah, but it's important. I think the important thing to understand for people who will be watching, who have that tendency, is to think that you have to have a building. Right. And so the question is, what is that building pointing to? What is being manifested in that building? And people kind of know it intuitively, like they'll still reach a limit in the sense that they wouldn't have like, if they could avoid it, they wouldn't have their church meeting in like a 5-foot basement. right? Like they wouldn't be like, oh, like it's not conducive to the thing we're doing. Like they wouldn't have their meeting in a hallway, right? And so because it's not conducive to what you're doing, it was like, yeah, we'll keep scaling that up. Like there are certain spaces that are conducive to certain purposes, that are dedicated to certain purposes. Just like the bathroom is dedicated for the things you do there, just like the bedroom is dedicated for things you do there. Well, there's also the idea that you dedicate spaces for worshiping God. And it doesn't mean that you still can't pray God in your bathroom or in your bedroom, but it is important to dedicate spaces to these purposes because it lays out the hierarchy of what's important. Because at first what you say, and this is obviously normal, is you say, well, why would you just worship on Sundays? Like, can't you worship any day? Like, why do you worship in church? Can't you worship anywhere? And it starts that way and it ends with, actually, you don't worship at all, and you don't know and there's no difference for you between going to the mall and going to church. It's all the same. And so it's like, so I think that it's weird. To me, it's interesting because I think people could have argued that a few hundred years ago, but now that the world is so flat and that the world is so devout, like is so empty of meaning and of purpose and of direction and of centers and all of that, I'm surprised people can still think that way. Because it's like, look around, folks, the world's turning to mush. We need dedication. Like we need holy things means dedicated to a purpose,
Yeah, it's so true. The architecture is just so depressing. The suburbs are just replicated blocks of houses on, and when you go into the town centres in the UK anyway, you've just recently been to London, so you've recognised that, we've still got quite a lot of beautiful architecture, but we just have stopped building buildings like that, haven't we?
Yeah. And it's even
we just put up glass towers.
When you go to the town centers, like my town does not have a center. There's no town center in my town. It's just a suburb. And there's another suburb next to it, and there's another one next to it. And you wouldn't really know the difference between when you're in one suburb or another, and there's no center. So
that's bizarre, isn't it?
There you go. It's just like, it's basically like turning to mush. It's just a bunch of things laid out on a horizontal plane, a bunch of independent points that aren't connected with each other. You don't know your neighbors. You don't have.
We've seen that in America,
neighbors.
I think. Haven't we, Catherine? When we've visited, you've got like it's sort of interjoined by strip malls and then like a residential area, whereas it's still very much like towns in England, isn't it? With churches and town squares and stuff like that. So
yeah, we do still have, I think, those country villages, but America was really, I found it soulless. Like I love visiting America, and I'm not talking about everywhere, but there you want to go for a cup of tea and you can go to
down the highway.
Yeah, like you can go down a road that's so wide and you're in a car so big that it's just, and you just, why do people seek to flatten everything? Is it just a fear of tyranny and
it
not
creates power?
Do?
It really, power is below. So you a way of understanding it really is with Genesis 1. You have identity, right, and name and purposes, and then down here you have power, right? And so the lower you go, the less the identity is visible. Like the identity starts to kind of disappear, but then the more power you have. And so the idea of if you think of specialization, right, as a tool. So what you do in specialization is that you break things, right? So you say, oh, you used to be a seamstress, you could make dresses, you could do all that. It's like, well, what if I had someone who could just sew, and then one other person that can just cut, and then I move and I break down the unity, I break down the idea into multiple parts, and then I have so much power, like it just increases my power, and that's what it is.
You do, but what about the person who's just in a factory stitching a button?
Yeah, they're alienated.
So I can understand it's seeking power, but for most people, it's really just living in a high rise in a soulless city. So
that's why people are alienated. That's true.
So there is a hierarchy even in that, because there's a hierarchy of the powerful and the not powerful. in even it's communism, I suppose, is that
I was
flattening.
going to say bourgeoisie and the
Yeah,
proletariat. Yeah.
It's communism and capitalism. Both have the same
Yeah,
disease.
both.
Yeah.
Both.
And so the capitalist, what happens, like you said, is that in some ways the factories and the workers become the bodies of very, very influential, powerful people. They have kingdoms that no king in the ancient world could have dreamed of. And so, so you have these massive hierarchies where the like you said, the people at the bottom are basically just interchangeable dots that you could just move around. They don't have personalities. They're just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're not. And it's so funny because we're so used to thinking that's how the world works that it's actually not how the world works. Actually, a family is more how the world works in terms of relationality and humanity, or even I hate to say this, people are going to hate this, but like an ancient lordship is more like how the world works, because it's true that the serfs would have been the body of the Lord, but the Lord knows their name, for goodness sake, and he knows that they just had a new little baby and that maybe they're a little bit in trouble, they need some medical help. He has to take care of them because they're part of his world. But it's not true for Google. My goodness, they just look at how many people they need to fire on a spreadsheet, and they just basically pull the trigger. So it's like it's obviously our world is very alienated, and communism is the same. Obviously, communism is much worse, but it has this kind of completely alienated structure where we're just robots, But a lot of people are rejecting that now. This is what's interesting is, economists are complaining about the great, what do they call it? Like the idea that people are just checking out, like all these young people, they're like, you know what? I'm just not going to play the game. And they're annoyed with that. But it's like, this is a completely, and these people, what they want is they want more connection. They want more meaning. They want to stay close to their families. They're not going to move for a job. Like this idea in the United States, in America, it's so normal. Like, oh, I'm just going to move for a job. I'm just going to leave my family and I'm going to go somewhere else just because I have this career opportunity. This is completely normal. I've done it. It's totally normal to do that. But this is not normal. Like, this is not normal society.
No, I agree. I think it's weird. I think it's like an over focus on solidarity without the right balance of subsidiarity.
That's right. There's a lack of subsidiarity, and that's exactly what is needed right now, is to be able to start participating in subsidiarity again, right? To be deliberate about our choices, to be deliberate about. There's some great initiatives. I see people doing some wonderful things, trying to reintegrate subsidiarity in people's lives. Obviously, church communities are a great way to do that, in a very easy way, involving your parents in your kid's life. Like these are things that you never in the past you never would have said out loud because it was so normal, but now it's actually become like not obvious that you should involve your parents in your children's life, that you have to say it. And it's like, maybe
it's radical. It's become radical.
Yeah, uncles and aunts and and neighbors, actually, also, like all of that, you should do that.
I really do think, I've said for a little while, I'm trying to step back a little bit from some of the madness in social media and stuff. But I do think the answer, first of all, is Our Lady's fiat, for sure. Like it's that God's will be done, and then it's in ourselves. Like, if we're not striving for sanctity, if we're not trying to be holy in our own lives and raise our children and return them to God, it's no good talking about the problems of the world, because because what are we doing? So I can totally see that. I just because I know your time is short, and of course there's always much to talk about, I can't let you go without getting your thoughts, given that we've just been talking about capitalism and communism and kind of disordered ideas. I'm just trying to find a way to crowbar this story in, to be honest, Jonathan, which I thought of you when I read it, because it's a story in the news a couple of days ago of this woman saying she's challenging Nike and Adidas and Puma over single shoes. And she points to the fact, she's a Paralympian, that corporations have been adopting kind of disability into marketing to try and increase their revenue, let's say. And when I read it, I thought, well, fair enough. So why not say, then why don't you make shoes just one shoe? And I'm trying to get this off. There we are. And I thought of you because I know you've spoken a lot about the margins and the gargoyles on the outside of church, and not to call disabled people margins and gargoyles, but there's an element in which it's not the norm. I always remember
exception. I mean, the word to use is that you become an exception to normality.
Yeah, but wouldn't this be the end result of that? You know, once you start saying, I'm going to adopt something to leverage it for my own material gain, a Nike or Puma. Well, I would say good on you saying, well, then start making one shoe then.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously, this is ridiculous, which is why I imagine the reason why the article has been written is just to rage. It's just rage bait. It's just for people to read it and think how like ridiculous this is, or agree. I guess some people might agree. You know, the problem with exceptions is that they're exceptions, and there's an indefinite amount of exceptions. This is the issue. And so that's why there's normality. And then, especially in Christianity, we have something like compassion and mercy. And compassion and mercy are there to be able to include exceptions, both, you know, very small ones in people sinning around you, people kind of breaking normality, but obviously also as a society. And so now the funny thing about this, I mean, it's funny because you think, well, let's keep going down this line, this line, because if you're going to make shoes for people with one foot, then you should make shoes for people with club feet, and then you should maybe make shoes for people that don't have a foot, maybe just have like a nub at the end of their leg, and then you should make shoes. You know, like I can keep going forever, right? I can continue. You could make shoes for people that have lost 3 toes because it's pretty uncomfortable in the shoe because they've lost 3 toes. So,
and that's before you even get onto gloves.
Yeah, and so like there's just like an indefinite amount of exceptions, obviously, to the rule. And so the what I call it, the weaponizing of compassion in some ways, this, you know, and it's an upside down version of what Christian mercy is, which is Christian mercy would be something like you meet someone who's lost their foot, and you know, it could even be, this could be something that could actually happen. You could have someone who comes into the store with one leg and one foot, and the guy at the counter has mercy on the person. He's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to charge you 50% off because, you know, you've had it rough. You know, I really appreciate you. And that's a normal Christian reaction to this situation. But the person demanding that now the normality adapts to them completely and creates official versions of their exception, that is going into absolute madness. It's not sustainable, like I said, because the idea that having only one foot is the only form of handicap that you could have, there are millions of them, like every single possible exception that you could have, and you should make shoes for people that have no feet. Why aren't you making shoes for people that have no feet at all? I mean,
it's relativism, though, isn't it? It's the natural trajectory that we're on, is this sort of complete meltdown into utter relativism, where it's our own reality is the only reality we understand, and therefore there has to be a billion different versions of reality.
It's the idea that the exception is always being stifled or oppressed by the rule. That's the vision that we have, and that, in fact, the existence of the rule is a form of oppression because of exceptions. And so, you know, but that's an untenable position, like you said, because what happens is, you see it with the LGBT stuff, is that you just keep adding letters to the LGBT, and it's like the LGBTQIA, and then you just keep going, because there is no different to exception. There's no limit to the exception, because it's intercategorical in itself, and like between categories there's a bunch of chaos.
Yeah.
And think about it, like you can think about it in terms of someone. Think about it this way: it's like you have I don't know, an English person and a Somali, and then they get married, and then you create a category which is, oh, he's half English, half Somali, and then that person, let's say, gets married with someone who's have this and have that. And so imagine if you had categories for every single mixture that existed, and you started to create like, well, I need rights. What are the rights for the 1/4 Somali, 1/4 British, and 1/4 Samoan? And it's like, what rights
Special
for those people? Like, what are you
passports
talking
and-
about? This is madness, right? So we have ways to deal with exceptions, but making rules for exceptions is not the right way to go. Making official things for exceptions doesn't work.
Yeah, which is why all one in Christ is the answer, is the only to hold in tension that diversity in unity. We were talking, weren't we, Mark, in schools, people are at pains, even in Catholic schools, to have LGBT bullying policies. And you think, why not just have an anti-bullying policy? And that includes gingers and four eyes.
Well, just to pick out
gay people. You know, like,
Gingers, Catherine.
What?
Can't believe you're picking on gingers.
Sorry. No.
It's the only safe category in England you're allowed.
Yeah,
to
I know.
pick on.
Man, can you imagine?
Listen, ginger lives matter. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
We Jonathan, we've encroached on your time long enough for today, because I know you're a very busy man. But I thank you so much for covering such ground. It's always so interesting, and I do hope you'll join us again in conversation.
Thanks,
of course,
Jonathan.
Yeah, all the best. Thank you. It was great.
Thanks. God bless. Right. And visit Jonathan's website, symbolicworld.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And check out his videos and content there. And also order your books, because you've got some great books as well that you've been working on.
Yeah, we've been publishing children's books. In some ways, this is the solution to, a lot of things we're doing now is in some ways complaining about the state of the world, which is fine. We need to do. But I think that if we want things to get better, we have to capture culture. And so we're telling beautiful celebratory versions of the fairy tales, in the hope to actually start with children, like to help children see beauty and to learn about how we have all these powerful stories in our traditions once again. So
yeah, they're brilliant. I ordered them myself for my own children here last Christmas. So, and I think you've produced more since. So do take a look at that, and visit our own web. That was good, wasn't it? And visit our own website, catholicunscripted.com, and you can check out all our articles and videos there. But for now, thanks for watching. God bless. Goodbye.